Friends, Not Masters. A Political Autobiography. Mohammad Ayub Khan, President of Pakistan. Published in 1967. This is a Plisken audiobook presentation dedicated to those who have worked for the building of Pakistan as a progressive and modern state, and to those who have defended it with such distinction. Chapter 11. The Constitution and Ideology. Part 1. To follow my approach to the constitutional problems of Pakistan, it is necessary to go back a little in time. I was staying on 4 October 1954, at a hotel in London where I had broken my journey for a couple of days on my way to the United States. It was a warmish night and I could not sleep, but it was not the weather alone that kept me awake. The news from home was disturbing, the portents ominous. I was feeling uneasy, because I had heard that Governor-General Ghulam Mohammad might do something reckless. He and Prime Minister Muhammad Ali Bogra were feuding with each other. I had a premonition that Ghulam Mohammad might draw me into politics, which I wanted, above all things, to avoid. I was pacing up and down the room when I said to myself, let me put down my ideas in a military fashion. What is wrong with the country and what can be done to put things right? I approached the question much in the manner of drawing up a military appreciation. What is the problem, what are the factors involved, and what is the solution, if there is a solution? So I sat down at the desk in my room and started writing. In the beginning my mind was confused, but soon everything stood out clearly. In a few hours I had produced a document which contained my thinking, and set out my approach to the problem facing the country. I came to the conclusion that the affairs of the country, though in a desperate state, were not beyond redemption. This is how the document read. A short appreciation of present and future problems of Pakistan. The aim. 1. The ultimate aim of Pakistan must be to become a sound, solid and cohesive nation to be able to play its destined role in world history. This can be achieved only if as a start a constitution is evolved that will suit the genius of the people, and be based on the circumstances confronting them, so that they are set on the path of unity, teamwork and creative progress. 2. Before such a constitution can be devised, it is obvious that certain preliminary steps will have to be taken that will provide the setting for unhindered evolution of such constitution. Taking of such preliminary steps therefore becomes the immediate aim of Pakistan. Factors, general. 3. The people of Pakistan consist of a variety of races, each with its own historical background and culture. East Bengalis, who constitute the bulk of the population, probably belong to the very original Indian races. It would be no exaggeration to say that up to the creation of Pakistan, they had not known any real freedom or sovereignty. They have been in turn ruled either by the caste Hindus, Mughals, Pathans or the British. In addition, they have been and still are under considerable Hindu cultural and linguistic influence. As such they have all the inhibitions of downtrodden races, and have not yet found it possible to adjust psychologically to the requirements of the newborn freedom. Their popular complexes, exclusiveness, suspicion, and a sort of defensive aggressiveness probably emerge from this historical background. Prudence, therefore, demands that these factors should be recognized and catered for, and they be helped, so as to feel equal partners and prove an asset. That can be done only if they are given a considerable measure of partnership. B. The population in West Pakistan, on the other hand, is probably the greatest mixture of races found anywhere in the world. Lying on the gateways to the Indian subcontinent, it was inevitable that each successive conquering race should have left its traces here. Consequently, this forced mixture of races has brought about fusion of ideas, outlook and culture, despite the linguistic variety that obtained. Strategically and economically too, this area is destined to stand or fall as a whole. Lying as it does in the basin of the Indus River and its tributaries, its future economic development must be considered as a whole, to achieve the maximum results. All this indicates, therefore, that West Pakistan, in order to develop properly and prove a bulwark of defense from the north or south, must be welded into one unit, and all artificial provincial boundaries removed, regardless of any prejudices to the contrary, which are more the creation of politicians than real. When doing this, however, regard must be had for the prejudices and fears of people, and their future balanced development. This unit should, therefore, be so subdivided that each subunit embraces a racial group or groups with common economic, communications and potentiality for development, and administration decentralized in them to the maximum possible. C. The creation of one unit in West Pakistan, however, is possible only if the biggest constituent is prepared to show large-heartedness, and make a sacrifice for the common good. Punjab is the biggest and the most important province in West Pakistan, with more than half its population. If she insisted on proportionate representation, the others would at once shy off. Besides, no coalition can work with one dominant partner. Therefore, for its preservation and the glory of Pakistan, Punjab should be asked to accept 40% representation in the legislature of this unit, others having representation in proportion to their population. But before such a unit can be brought into being, the existing provincial and state legislatures and cabinets will have to be done away with, so as not to interfere with and impede reorganization. Deductions from the above: 1. Call East Bengal one unit, and give it as much partnership as possible. 2. Reorganize West Pakistan into one unit, and give it similar partnership as above. 3. Abolish present provincial ministries and legislatures to speed up reorganization. 4. Subdivide each unit into convenient subunits, each embracing a racial group or groups with common economy, communications and prospective development. Administration to be decentralized in these subunits as much as possible. 5. In order to remove any fear of domination, Punjab to be asked to accept 40% representation in West Pakistan unit legislature. 6. Both East and West units to have their own legislatures. 4. Given the above, the fear of any one unit dividing and dominating others would disappear, harmonious and unfettered development in each unit would be possible, fear of provincialism will be reduced to the minimum, saving in manpower in eliminating so many top-heavy provincial administrations would be affected, expense of administration would be reduced to the minimum, and the danger of politicians interfering with the local administrators curtailed. In other words, very valuable gains would have been made by such a reorganization. The administrative structure of each provincial unit. 5. Having created 2 provincial units in Pakistan, the next question is to determine the structure of administration in each unit. Before answering such a question, it would be appropriate to reiterate the fact that our eventual aim must be to develop democracy in Pakistan, but of a type that suits the genius of the people. Our people are mostly uneducated, and our politicians not so scrupulous. The people are capable of doing great things, but they can also be easily misled. Unfettered democracy can, therefore, prove dangerous, especially nowadays when communism from within and without is so quick to make use of its weaknesses. We, therefore, have to have a controlled form of democracy with checks and counter-checks. This indicates that legislature finds the cabinet, whose actions are controllable by a governor, who in turn is controlled by the head of state president, in certain circumstances, governor having the power to remove ministers or ministries. He should also be in a position to protect the rights of the services, and have them carry out their obligations. 6. Connected with the elections of legislatures, is the question of franchise. It is too late now to resile from universal suffrage, however great its shortcomings may be. The answer would be to provide checks here too, so as to prevent its becoming irresponsible. We must not forget that democracy is a means to an end, and not an end by itself, and that there is no set pattern of democracy that can be applied to every country without modifications. It would be advisable, therefore, to enable people to elect a college of people in each subunit, who, in turn, elect members for the provincial and central legislatures. Such an election system would be more easily manageable, and would make for a good deal of responsibility. As to the size and type of provincial and central legislatures, opinions may differ, but the need for strict economy in men and money would indicate that one legislature for each province of about 150 members each would do. Similarly, the central legislature, of which mention will be made later, should not be of a strength more than that. 8. Whilst talking about administration, there is the problem of our legal system, which is most expensive, ineffective, dilatory, tyrannical, and totally unsuited to our genius. This would need complete overhaul and made humane, quick and cheap. The answer would seem to be in having a jirga-cum judicial system, and revision of evidence and procedural laws with only one right of appeal. The highest judicial court for dealing with cases other than constitutional would have to be created in each subunit. The federal or the provincial high courts should deal only with cases of a constitutional nature. Deductions from the above. 1. In each province there should be one legislature of about 150 members each, headed by a cabinet. There should be a governor, in each province appointed by president with powers or control over the cabinet and the services. 2. Electoral system should consist of election of electoral colleges in each subunit by universal suffrage, these colleges to elect members for the provincial legislature, the central legislature, and also elect the president, of which mention will be made later. 3. The legal system should be simplified and decentralized to subunits. Introduction of jirga-cum judicial system to be examined. 4. Government servants' conduct rules should be revised, so as to make summary dealings in cases of rewards and punishment possible. The structure of the centre. 9. Having created 2 units of the country, their federation on an equal basis without fear of domination of one over the other, becomes a practical proposition. This federation should consist of one legislative house of about 150 strong, equally divided amongst the 2 units, headed by a cabinet. This cabinet should have executive powers as voted by the legislature, subject to some effective control by the president, who should be elected. The president should be made the final custodian of power on the country's behalf, and should be able to put things right, both in the provinces and the centre should they go wrong. Laws should be operative only if certified by the President except in cases where they are passed by 3/4 majority. No change in constitution should be made unless agreed to by the President. In case of serious disagreement between the President and the legislature, provision should be made for fresh elections of either one or both. Acceptance of the Muhammad Ali formula, for election of President and passing of laws, would perhaps be necessary. 10. For reasons given before, the provinces should have as much autonomy as possible, and that means that in addition to the subjects already in their hands, communications, except interprovincial, industries, commerce, health, etc., should be handed over to the provinces, leaving defense, foreign affairs and currency in the hands of the centre. 11. The quick development of our resources and raising the standard of living of our people is one of the main problems which Pakistan has to solve. This can be done effectively only if we overhaul our educational system, to prepare our manpower for the task, and to have well-controlled and well-financed organizations to undertake major development projects. That indicates Organization of Development Board rather, on the PIDC fashion for education, cottage industries, land and power, and hosts of other things in each province. This arrangement will help relieve local administrations of a lot of headaches, and will ensure quick development. 12. But nothing much will be gained, unless we carry out land reforms in a scientific fashion. Possession of vast areas of land by a few is no longer defensible, nor is acquisition of land without compensation. The Egyptian example is a very good one. They allowed the owner a certain limit of holding, buying the rest for distribution, amongst peasants, who will pay the cost in 70 yearly installments. 13. It was mentioned earlier that the President should be made the repository of power. He can discharge this duty only if the services are made directly responsible to him. To do that, a system of joint staff, headed by a Supreme Commander, will have to be introduced. The Supreme Commander should be appointed by the President. In addition to other duties, he should be made defense member and an ex officio member of the Cabinet. This will not only knit the services together and lead to economy in pooling things common to all the services, but would put a stop to any attempt by politicians to interfere in the internal affairs of the services to promote their personal interests. 14. The experience of the last 7 years has shown how dangerous the use of ambiguous clichés can be. Everybody said we should have Islamic democracy without ever defining what was and how it differed from the normally understood democracy. Perhaps it is not possible to define it. Would it therefore not be correct to say that any variety of democracy when worked in the spirit of the Quran can be called an Islamic democracy? We shall perhaps do better and avoid many pitfalls if we accept this concept. Outline Plan 15. As a preliminary, abolish provincial ministries and legislatures in West Pakistan, and create one province of it under a governor with the requisite staff. 16. Create subunits in East Bengal and West Pakistan, equivalent to a commissioner's division. Each division containing racial group or groups with common language, common economy and communications and common development potential. Decentralize administration, so that the head of the division becomes the kingpin of administration. 17. Overhaul the legal system so as to make it cheaper and quicker, placing the highest appellate court in a division, except for cases involving points of constitutional law, for which a federal court or a high court in each province should suffice. A jirga-cum judicial system should be evolved and procedural law simplified. 18. Create development boards in each produce covering education, water and power, land reforms and development, cottage industries, etc. 19. Create a joint staff for the three services headed by a supreme commander who, in addition to other duties, should be defense member, and be ex officio member, of the central cabinet, coining finally under the president. The central government to consist of one legislature of about 150 members equally divided between the two producers, a cabinet, and the president. The president to have overriding powers to assume control should things go wrong in the provinces or the centre. To avoid undue domination of one produce over the other, apply the Muhammad Ali formula to the election of president and passage of bills. The provincial government in East Bengal to consist of a legislature of about 150 members headed by a cabinet with a governor appointed by the president. The governor to have some measure of control over the cabinet and the services. Same arrangement should apply in the province of West Pakistan, except that the representation of the present Punjab to have 40%, and the rest of the seats divided amongst others in accordance with their population. Provinces to have maximum autonomy possible. The centre dealing only with defence, foreign affairs, currency and such communications as are interprovincial. Government servants' conduct rules should be revised, so as to make summary awards or punishments possible. The suffrage should be adult franchise, who should be called upon to elect an electoral college in each division, who will then elect the president and members of the central and provincial legislatures. Finally, hope and pray that this constitution is worked in the spirit of the Quran. If so, our solidarity, strength and future is assured. Part 2. Shortly after the incident when I declined Governor-General Ghulam Mohammad's offer to take over the administration of the country, he said to me, "Well, one thing you must do, you must come into the cabinet." I did so, and my first act was to tell the Governor-General and my cabinet colleagues that we had to do something constructive. They asked me, "What is it that you would have us do?" I put forward the 1954 document. "This is my program, this is what we have got to do. The first thing is to unify West Pakistan." I do not claim that one unit was entirely my idea, other people too were talking about it. But my contribution was that when I joined the cabinet, I wanted to work for two clear objectives: to save the armed forces from the interference of the politicians, and to unify the provinces of West Pakistan into one unit. I pressed very hard for it, and initiated the process of merger of the provinces. I well remember one of the personal experiences which helped to convince me of the need for integrating West Pakistan. There was an occasion when we were putting up a manufacturing plant at the Wall Ordnance Factory. When I went there for inspection, I found that the machinery was installed but could not be operated because power from Malakand hydroelectric station could not cross the Indus River. This appeared strange, but, on inquiry, I found that power transmission across the Indus was not possible, because the Chief Minister of the Northwest Frontier Province, Khan Abdul Qayyum Khan, and the Chief Minister of the Punjab, Mian Mumtaz Daltana, were not on good terms. It was a ridiculous state of affairs, and most distressing. No one seemed to have any authority to control the provinces, or to coordinate their working. The basic weakness in the political system was that there was no focus of power. We had adopted a foreign system of parliamentary rule without understanding the requirements of the system, or having the necessary conditions in which it could operate. I was not alone in recognizing the inadequacies of the parliamentary system applied to our circumstances. Professor Rushbrook Williams, who was closely associated with the Quaid-e-Azam when the latter was a member of the Indian Legislative Assembly in Delhi, recalled that the Quaid-e-Azam had told him time and again, "This parliamentary system is not for us, but we have to show allegiance to it to defeat the British, to get you out of the country. It is the only argument you will understand, but I doubt very much if we can work this system." During the brief period that the Quaid-e-Azam was Governor-General of Pakistan, we had, in effect, a presidential form of government in the country. The Quaid-e-Azam was Governor-General, and he was also President of the Constituent Assembly. The Governor-General, and not the Prime Minister, presided at cabinet meetings, and this was done at the instance of the cabinet itself. The Quaid-e-Azam was reluctant at first, for it was an unusual arrangement, but on reflection, he said that he would attend the meetings, that he would take the cabinet's advice but would not be overruled. I remember an interesting meeting I had with the late Aga Khan soon after Liaquat Ali Khan's assassination. The Aga Khan used to write to me whenever I was in England for any conference. On this occasion I went to Nice and stayed with him at Yakimor, a very fine place, overlooking the sea. The Aga Khan was then suffering from heart trouble. He had a tremendous personality, and I was deeply impressed by his knowledge of world affairs and his foresight. I can recall several of our conversations and reconstruct them here from memory. I said to him, "Sir, if you had been a little younger you would be a great asset to us." He said, "I wish I had been. Pakistan has been my dream. Now that it has become a reality, I wish I could be of some assistance." He went on to say, "You have got Pakistan after great sacrifices, you do not want to lose it, but if the parliamentary system is the one you are going to follow, then you will lose Pakistan. I have called you here to tell you that you will lose it this way, and that you are the one man who can save it." I asked, "How do you think I can save it?" He said, "This system has to be changed, something has to be evolved which is akin to your history, your traditions and your way of thinking, and you are really the man concerned." I said, "Well, I understand Aga." I began to call him Aga after a stage. "I know of your burning desire to see Pakistan prosper, but you must have patience. Things will work out all right." He replied, "No, you are a child, you do not understand, things are not going to work out all right." Then, one day, the Aga Khan started talking about his association with the Quaid-e-Azam. He said, "He and I never saw eye to eye, but I regarded him as a very great man indeed. I say tills because you get one or two opportunities in life, when you have to take major decisions. The Quaid-e-Azam had the choice of saying whether the Muslims of India should or should not have Pakistan, and he said, they will have nothing but Pakistan. He took the right decision, at the right time. You can see his breadth of vision, how great he was. A man of tremendous determination and sense of purpose. Once he made up his mind, he put everything into it. I wish he had lived. I devoutly wish that too. The Quaid-e-Azam had the personality and the authority, if he had been spared by Providence, to produce a workable constitution. People would have accepted anything from him. He was the undisputed leader, and is still the idol of the people. Had he been able to give the country a constitution, feelings might have settled down well in time, and the schisms which were later to divide the community might have been avoided. Part 3. By the time I became responsible for the affairs of the country in 1958, the mood of the people had undergone a certain change. The earlier enthusiasm had given place to lethargy, and the first flush of robust optimism had turned into disillusionment. Many hidden tensions and conflicts had come to the surface, and the worms of provincialism and parochialism had riddled the fine woodwork of national unity. Regional pulls and centrifugal forces were exercising great pressure, and the nation seemed to be at war with itself. We Pakistanis are a great mixture, of races and of types, individualistic in our outlook in civil life. We do not easily make a team, and yet when disciplined we make first-class soldiers. This offers every budding leader an opportunity to make a team of his own. We are apt to be emotional and do not always take a realistic view of things. No demagogue can resist the temptation of working on our emotions and misleading us. We criticize everybody except ourselves, and as there is a dearth of people with knowledge and experience, there is a scramble for offices. All this accounts for the distressing and dismal conditions in which the country found itself after the first few years of independence. Yet I was convinced that our people were willing and hard-working, capable of facing great difficulties cheerfully, and making great sacrifices whenever called upon to do so. They can never fail in a crisis, blessed as they are with a faith which is a great force for unity and inspires them constantly with a sense of justice and feeling for mankind. My task, as I saw it, was to set up institutions which should enable the people of Pakistan to develop their material, moral and intellectual resources and capacities to the maximum extent. The essential prerequisite of this task was to analyze the national problems objectively. I could not convince myself that we had become a nation in the real sense of the word. The whole spectacle was one of disunity and disintegration. We were divided in two halves, each half dominated by a distinct linguistic and cultural pattern. The geographical distance between the two halves was in itself a divisive factor which could be exploited to create all kinds of doubts and suspicions among the people. We had inherited a deep antagonism which separated the people in the countryside from the urban classes. The latter represented a small minority in the total population, but it was a vocal minority, and the people in the villages suffered from a sense of domination and exploitation by the elite of the towns. Then there were the regional identities, which often asserted themselves to the exclusion of the national identity. These identities created new demands on national resources, and since there was an overall shortage of available funds, no region could secure all that it wanted. But more than anything else, it was the irreconcilable nature of the forces of science and reason, and the forces of dogmatism and revivalism, which was operating against the unification of the people. A sharp cleavage had been created between the state and the religion, and all the old controversies, the temporal versus the spiritual, the secular versus the religious, revived. In more precise terms, the essential conflict was between the ulema and the educated classes. All that was material, temporal and secular was identified with the educated, and all that was religious and spiritual became the monopoly of the ulema. The educated classes were regarded as those who had been led astray by Western thought and influence. The ulema, who in some cases were versed in Arabic and had made a special study of religious matters, were regarded as the custodians of Islam. Among them were many who did not hesitate to convert the influence which they exercised over the minds of the people into a political asset. They had gradually built up for themselves a strong political position, opposed to that of the Western educated groups in society. The conflict between these two classes has a long history, which I shall have occasion to describe briefly later. What surprised me was that the conflict should have assumed such grave proportions, in spite of the fact that there was complete agreement between the two groups in matters of principle. Both groups subscribed wholeheartedly to Islam, and both believed in building Pakistan into a strong and dynamic nation. But the two had not been able to work out a common and positive approach to national problems. Instead, the educated regarded the ulema as relics of the past, and the ulema treated the educated as heretics and unworthy. How were these conflicts to be reconciled? Islam visualizes life as a unity, and the Islamic code represents a complete cultural whole. How can life be divided into separate compartments, religious and material, each compartment governed by its own laws? In Islam, human activity is determined by the same principle. Life is one, and so are the laws governing life. A man at home, at work, or at prayer, is guided by the same code of behavior. The same rules which guide us in our dealings with our own family apply to our dealings with others. There are no special spiritual rules distinct from rules of conduct in everyday life. Man is judged as a whole, and his actions are determined by their moral content. All this was true. But the picture of our society as I saw it did not conform to this. In practice, our life was broken up into two distinct spheres, and in each sphere we followed a different set of principles. How were we to get out of this morass and adopt a unified approach to life? That was the crux of the problem. If we failed, we would stagnate and remain backward. And backwardness meant slavery. Our own experience had proved that. Others had abandoned their religion in search of advancement. We were fortunate to have a religion which could serve as a vehicle of progress, but superstition and ritualism had given us a fatalistic outlook which was completely contrary to the teachings and message of Islam. Muslim society could not move forward, unless Islam was relieved of all the inhibiting and alien influences which had distorted its real character. It was this that was my great concern, and I recorded the following note on April 12, 1959. Ever since taking over the reins of government in the country, my main anxiety has been to unite the people and to resolve the internal and external problems of the country. The problems we are facing are enormous, but with God's grace it should be possible to resolve them at least partially, if not wholly. But how to unite the people is a matter which affects the realm of faith and spirit, and to which I have not been able to find an effective answer so far. Yet it is imperative that an answer be found soonest possible, otherwise we run the risk of being overwhelmed by other forces and ceasing to exist as an independent people. In fact, then there is every possibility of losing Pakistan. This must not be allowed to happen under any circumstance, hence the extreme urgency of finding an answer which is comprehensible, tangible, and which should rouse spontaneous and constant enthusiasm, and prove workable in the light of the requirements of modern life. My feelings are: man as an animal is moved by basic instincts for preservation of life and continuance of race, but as a being conscious of his power of thinking, he has the power to control and modify his instincts. His greatest yearning is for an ideology for which he should be able to lay down his life. What it amounts to is that the more noble and eternal an ideology, the better the individual and the people professing it. Their lives will be much richer, more creative, and they will have a tremendous power of cohesion and resistance. Such a society can conceivably be bent but never broken. Such an ideology with us is obviously that of Islam. It was on that basis that we fought for and got Pakistan, but having got it, we failed to order our lives in accordance with it. The main reason is that we have failed to define that ideology in a simple and understandable form. Also in our ignorance we began to regard Islamic ideology as synonymous with bigotry and theocracy, and subconsciously began to feel shy of it. The time has now come when we must get over this shyness, face the problem squarely, and define this ideology in simple but modern terms, and put it to the people, so that they can use it as a code of guidance. In order to define the ideology of Islam, and to apply it to present-day conditions of life, and especially the conditions of life in Pakistan, it seems that the following broad outline will have to be elaborated. I. Singleness of God, man's urge to love him in thought and deed. B. All human beings are equal before God, therefore the basic equality of man, without distinction of color, race or location, must be recognized. C. True that in such a society national territorialism has no place, yet those living in an area are responsible for its defense and security and development. Attachment to the country we live in and get our sustenance from is therefore paramount. D. If the above are the ingredients of religion, then religion has to have a say in matters both temporal and secular. Define how. E. This world is designed for us to live in constructively and fruitfully. It is not designed to be shunned. In order that creative power is developed, modern education is absolutely vital. F. Define the duties of the state and those of the individual. What is the definition of a Momin believer? State fundamental rights for the individual which are wholesome for the individual as well as for the state. H. What method should we adopt to acquaint the present generation and the future generations with this philosophy? I. Considering that the people of Pakistan are a collection of so many races with different backgrounds, how can they be welded into a unified whole, whilst keeping intact their local pride, culture and traditions? The requirement be to express the above in a language which should be comprehensible to the largest number of people and capable of being put into practice. Who should undertake this task? I could not possibly attempt it, because I was conscious of my limitations. I could only emphasize the need for bringing about unity and balance in society. We had to reconcile the requirements of our faith with the requirements and compulsions of the time. No nation could live and survive in the glory of its past alone. There was universal agreement that the country should have a democratic constitution, and a constitution which should enable the community to organize itself according to the essential principles of Islam, and to develop and progress with the times. The question was who should determine the democratic content of the constitution, and define the essential principles of Islam. There were two ways of doing this. We could determine these principles with or without the help of the ulema, and then introduce them by decree. The other alternative was to let people determine these principles themselves, with the assistance of specialized agencies, acting in an advisory capacity. I chose the latter course. The Constitution Commission was later to recommend that we should set up an International Muslim Commission, to advise us as to how our laws could be made to conform to the injunctions of the Holy Quran and the Sunnah. I doubted whether a commission of this kind would serve any useful purpose. I sounded some heads of states at that time, but they showed no enthusiasm for the idea. It was obvious that we would have to address ourselves to our problems, and work out our own solutions. The burden of thinking must rest on the community itself. The essential decision that I made in dealing with the question of giving an Islamic content to the Constitution for the country was that the responsibility of determining the principles according to which the affairs of the nation should be organized and conducted should be entrusted to the community itself. The Constitution should provide a framework based on the experience and history of Islam, and suited to the genius, temperament and traditions of the people. But within that framework the community should be free to adopt principles derived from the Holy Quran and the Sunnah, and evolve methods for the application of those principles to its own circumstances. This was the only way in which the principles of democracy could be reconciled with the principles of Islam. The question arose as to how the community should discern and define the principles of Islam. There was no ready answer to this. No precedent of an Islamic constitution was available. The Holy Quran contained the principles of guidance, but did not prescribe a detailed constitution for running a country. The example of the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, in organizing an Islamic state, was of course available. After the Holy Prophet, the four caliphs organized and administered the state according to their understanding of Islamic principles. Each one of them had applied the principles of Islam, and the teachings of the Holy Prophet, in accordance with their circumstances. No specific pattern of government, or even of the election of the head of government, had been established. The conclusion was inescapable, that Islam had not prescribed any particular pattern of government, but had left it to the community to evolve its own pattern to suit its circumstances, provided that the principles of the Quran and the Sunnah were observed. In more recent times, a number of Muslim countries had adopted constitutions to meet their requirements without claiming that they had produced an Islamic constitution which could be adopted by all Islamic countries. It was clear to me that Pakistan must work out its own system of application of the principles of Islam to its conditions. It was equally clear to me that this exercise must be conducted within the accepted democratic norms, of which the most important is the participation of the people in the affairs of the state. The right of the people as a whole to organize and run their affairs could not be curtailed or compromised in any manner, and no person or group of persons, however knowledgeable, could be allowed to sit in judgment on the community expressing itself through its elected representatives. All this established the supremacy of the legislature acting for and on behalf of the people. It also established that the people must have the freedom to choose their representatives and their leaders of government. To ensure that the executive and the legislature acted within the provisions of the Constitution, there was need to set up an independent judiciary. In this scheme of things there was obviously no place supra-body of religious experts exercising a power of veto over the legislature and the judiciary. In all this, I was guided by my understanding of the institution of ijma, consensus, provided in Islam. According to one school of thought, ijma represents the agreement, in a matter requiring opinion or decision, of the mujtahids, people who, by virtue of their knowledge of Islam, have a right to form their own judgment. Another school of thought interprets ijma as the opinion of the majority of all Muslims. There is yet another view, that in modern times, ijma means the opinion of the legislature representing the elected representatives of the community, and that the right to formulate independent judgment on matters affecting the life of the people vests in the legislature, and not in any body of scholars. I did not want to prejudge the issue, and therefore in the constitutional arrangement, I left it to the representatives of the people to decide how they would like to form their judgment in matters relating to the Quran and the Sunnah. I thought it necessary to provide an Islamic advisory council backed by an Islamic research institute to assist the legislature in framing laws based on the concepts of Islam. The council was to have as members not only those persons who possessed a knowledge of Islam, but also those who understood the economic, political, legal, and administrative problems of the country, so that the requirements of Islam, and the requirements of the time and circumstances could be harmonized. I knew that the ulama would not be satisfied with this arrangement. They claimed the exclusive right to interpret and decide matters pertaining to Islam. While they maintained this claim, they refrained from producing any detailed constitutional document, knowing that such an attempt would only expose their internal differences. Their demand was that the government should agree to adopt an Islamic constitution, leaving it to the ulema to decide whether any law or measure was Islamic or not. I must pause here to discuss briefly the role of the ulema in the political life of Pakistan. The history of the ulema in this subcontinent has been one of perpetual conflict with the educated classes. This conflict came to a head during the struggle for Pakistan. It is well known that a number of Muslim ulema openly opposed the Quaid-e-Azam and denounced the concept of Pakistan. Now, I do not suggest that those among the ulema who opposed the creation of Pakistan were all men of easy conscience. Among them were people of ability and conviction, but there were also those who thought that Pakistan might mean the end of their authority. The best among them argued that the Indian freedom movement would be retarded if Hindus and Muslims did not act in union. Some also felt that Pakistan was essentially a territorial concept, and thus alien to the philosophy of Islamic Brotherhood, which was universal in character. Both these arguments were the result of confused thinking, and revealed a lamentable ignorance of the problems which the Muslims of the subcontinent were facing. Freedom was coming, it could not be delayed. What worried the Muslims was not the pace of freedom, but that when freedom came, they should be able to order their lives according to their own lights. The end of British domination should not become for the Muslims the beginning of Hindu domination. They were not seeking to change masters. They knew through past experience that the Hindus would not agree to live with them on equal terms within the same political framework. Those of the ulema who were members of the Indian National Congress failed to realize the significance of this simple truth, and eventually found themselves completely isolated from the mainstream of the Muslim struggle for emancipation. Their opposition to Pakistan on grounds of territorial nationalism was again the result of their failure to grasp contemporary realities. How could the demand of 100 million Muslims for a homeland of their own conflict with the concept of universal Islamic brotherhood? A homeland is an identity, and surely the Muslims of the subcontinent could not have served the cause of universal brotherhood by losing their identity, which is what would have inevitably happened if they had been compelled to accept the political domination of the Hindus. The ulama thought in terms of a glorious though nebulous past, and a vast but undefined future of Muslim brotherhood. And tins, more than anything else, damaged the growth of Muslim nationalism, and retarded the progress of Muslims in the subcontinent. Without a strong base of their own, the Muslims of the subcontinent were no more than a bunch of busybodies dabbling and interfering in the affairs of others, on the pretext of universal Islamic brotherhood. What use could they be to other Muslim countries, when they did not have even a home of their own? Those who thought that a national outlook was incompatible with the concept of universal brotherhood were really suggesting that the Muslims of the subcontinent should not try to establish a homeland of their own, because there were homelands enough of Muslims in other parts of the world. Why have a home of your own, when there are so many Muslim homes in the Middle East? It was this kind of reasoning which led the Khilafat movement, inspired by such noble ideals, into a blindly. Some of the ablest Muslim scholars in India argued that the Western powers, especially the British, were destroying the Ottoman Empire, but they did not realize that the Arabs and the Turks were locked in a grim battle to establish their respective national identities. The Turks had started the Turkish nationalist movement, and were strongly advocating the concept of Turkey for the Turks. Arab national sentiment demanded freedom from the Turks, and a separate identity of its own. it suited the British to exploit these national sentiments. Our ulmas who led the movement for re-establishing the Caliphate in Turkey never realized that the idea of Khilafat had been abandoned by the Turks themselves. Charmed by the vision of Islamic Brotherhood, they embarked on a prolonged struggle, thinking that if the Khilafat was re-established, the Muslim world in the Middle East would be held together under the Turks, and the Turks would one day become strong enough to come to India and drive out the British. Now the opposition offered by some of the ulema to Pakistan was not wholly the result of confused thinking or lack of awareness of the problems of Muslims. Behind it was the consciousness of power. I wish to make it clear that here I am referring to that class of ulema who were openly engaged in politics, and not those God-fearing people who have served the community by teaching the Quran and propagating the message of Islam in a selfless, humble, and devoted manner. The political ulema that I am talking of were those who claimed to be Indian nationalist Muslims as opposed to Muslim nationalists, and were the members of the Indian National Congress, or of other groups and organizations acting in collaboration with the Congress. These people exercised considerable power through their association with the Indian National Congress, which was the majority political party in the subcontinent. Even after the Quaid-e-Azam had demonstrated the representative character of the All India Muslim League, as the only political party entitled to speak on behalf of the Muslims of the subcontinent, Congress insisted on the inclusion of Muslim members of the Congress Party in any political setup proposed by the British. These Muslim members of Congress believed that in undivided India, with Congress as the ruling party, the leadership of the Muslims would remain in their hands. The ulema knew that the leadership of the Muslims in the subcontinent was gradually passing to the modem-educated classes who had found an eloquent and powerful spokesman in the Quaid-e-Azam. The determined fight which the Quaid-e-Azam was putting up against the British and the Hindus posed a serious threat to the authority of the ulema. The Quaid-e-Azam's advocacy of the cause of the Muslims, and his complete selflessness and devotion, transformed a mass of disorganized individuals into a powerful national reality. It was this new leadership that the ulema dreaded, and against which they aligned themselves with the Indian National Congress. The conflict between the educated Muslims and the ulema was not new. It started in the early years of British rule and reached its culmination during the struggle for Pakistan. For decades after the British had consolidated their position in India, the ulema kept the Muslims away from all sources of Western knowledge. Not until the middle of the 19th century was this barrier of prejudice broken, or did the Muslims begin to recover from this voluntary denial of knowledge. The Muslim Renaissance in the subcontinent began with Shah Waliullah, who started probing into the past and thinking in terms of the future. Then came Sir Syed Ahmad with his gospel that the Muslims could not progress without acquiring knowledge of modern sciences and technology. He asserted the simple truth that knowledge is not the preserve of any nation, it belongs to the whole of mankind. Quickly he was dubbed a kafir, non-believer, by a section of the ulema, but Sir Syed Ahmad, in spite of all the calumny that was heaped on him, refused to be browbeaten. He maintained a valiant posture and succeeded in releasing the intellectual energy of a nation. As more and more Muslims got educated in Western sciences, the hold of the ulema over the Muslim community began to weaken. Pakistan was the greatest defeat of the nationalist ulema. But they are a tenacious tribe, and power is an irresistible drug. Soon after the establishment of Pakistan, this type of ulema reorganized its forces. Now that Pakistan had been established, these people asked, who indeed, except the ulema, could decide how the new Muslim state should be run. Some of the nationalist ulema decided to stay in India, others hastened to Pakistan to lend a helping hand. If they had not been able to save the Muslims from Pakistan, they must now save Pakistan from the Muslims. Among the migrants was Maulana Abul Ala Maududi, head of the Jamaat-e-Islami party, who had been bitterly opposed to Pakistan. He sought refuge there, and forthwith launched a campaign for the Muslimization of the hapless people of Pakistan. This venerable gentleman was appalled by what he saw in Pakistan, an un-Islamic country, un-Islamic government, and an un-Islamic people. How could any genuine Muslim owe allegiance to such a government? So he set about the task of convincing the people of their inadequacies, their failings, and their general unworthiness. All this was really a facade. The true intention was to re-establish the supremacy of the ulema, and to reassert their right to lead the community. Since the movement for Pakistan was guided by the enlightened classes under the leadership of a man who was the symbol of Western education, the prestige of the ulema had been badly damaged. This damage had to be repaired. The political ulema had two courses open to them, either to re-examine their own position and to re-rease their attitudes, so that the people might be able to gain from their knowledge in dealing with their problems, or to demolish the position of the educated classes in the eyes of God-fearing but uneducated masses. Not unnaturally, they adopted the latter course. A society which had just emerged from a century of foreign domination, and was faced with the practical problems of building a new country, suffered from many defects and weaknesses. The ulema concentrated on these. They spread throughout the length and breadth of the country to convince the people of the misery of their existence and the failings of their government. They succeeded in converting an optimistic and enthusiastic people into a cynical and frustrated community. The ulema claimed that they knew all the answers, and could easily solve all the problems of the country, but that they were helpless as the country was in the control of the modern-educated classes, who had disowned Islam and taken to Western ways. Since no leadership could provide an immediate solution to all the problems of the community, the ulema were able to build up a large following for their point of view. It is in this context that the demand for an Islamic constitution was so ardently advocated by the ulema. Since no one had defined the fundamental elements of an Islamic constitution, no constitution could be called Islamic unless it received the blessings of all the ulema. The only way of having an Islamic constitution was to hand over the country to the ulema, and beseech them, "Lead kindly light." This is precisely what the ulema wanted. A constitution could be regarded as Islamic only if it were drafted by the ulema, and conceded them the authority to judge and govern the people. This was a position which neither the people nor I was prepared to accept, opposed as it was to the fundamental democratic principle that all authority must vest in the people. Gradually the outlines of the constitution began to emerge. While all sovereignty belongs to Allah, the people of an Islamic state have the authority to organize and administer their affairs in accordance with the injunctions of the Holy Quran and the Sunnah. God had given them access to sources of guidance and reason, and the intelligence to interpret and understand what was contained in those sources. They must use these faculties and determine the principles of guidance, if necessary with the assistance of experts. Having determined these principles, they should find methods and procedures for their application to their problems. They must be able to act in an organized manner through their representatives, to frame laws for the common good, and they must have a proper executive to implement those laws, and perform administrative duties on their behalf, and an independent judiciary, to determine that the legislature and the executive conduct themselves in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution. After these basic questions had been decided, I tried to determine the form of government, which would be best suited to the genius of the people, and would be in consonance with the teachings and history of Islam. A thorough study of Islamic history and of the constitutions adopted by different Muslim countries was undertaken. Two things emerged clearly from this study: there was no place for kingship in Islam, and succession could not be determined on a hereditary basis. The community as a whole must have the right to choose its leader, and the right to remove him. Another feature of Islamic history which had found general acceptance was that the leader, once he is chosen by the community, should have sufficient power to coordinate, supervise, and control the activities of government. Delegation of authority was permissible, but central control must remain in the hands of the chosen leader, who should provide unified direction to the country and its administration. Such a central authority seemed all the more necessary in our social and political circumstances. Without a strong central authority, the country could not be held together. Muslim rule in the subcontinent started to decline, and the community suffered after the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb, mainly because of the weakening of the central authority. And this was true of other periods of Islamic rule too. The intelligentsia of Pakistan had become accustomed to a sort of parliamentary democracy, but actual experience had shown that this form of government, instead of serving the cause of the people, had only encouraged divisive tendencies and brought the country to the verge of collapse. We had suffered enough in the past on account of it and could ill afford to repeat the same mistake. The alternative form, and the one which seemed to meet our requirements, was the presidential form of government. An elected president free to choose his cabinet was the answer, and a legislature consisting of one or two houses which should not be unduly large because of the paucity of the type of manpower required. The relationship between the President and ID's legislature must be so regulated as to give the President adequate powers to maintain stability, and prevent frequent breakdowns, in other words, the type of executive and legislature that approximated as far as possible to those that existed at the time of the early caliphs. We should provide reasonable checks and balances to ensure that both the President and the legislature acted with propriety, good sense, and responsibility. And if either of them failed in their respective spheres of duty, it should be possible to eliminate either one or both of them. The provincial governors should be nominated by the President to ensure that his writ would prevail in the provinces. Without this the whole edifice would crumble. There should be a full measure of delegation of subjects to the provinces to give them adequate responsibility, autonomy, and flexibility. To me these seemed the minimum basic requirements of the constitution I visualized for the country. But people who had got used to the parliamentary form, and knew how the form could be exploited, found it difficult to accept my thinking. I once invited some people in East Pakistan to meet me. The late Maulvi Tamizuddin Khan and Mr. Nurul Amin were among them. I discussed with them the whole range of constitutional problems. Maulvi Tamizuddin said he was dead against the presidential form of government, and I asked what his objection was. He replied, "My objection is that Muslim history as well as our political experience has been the rule of one man. My fear is that we will revert to it, even though we have got freedom and democracy." I said, "If this is in the Muslim blood, how are you going to take it out? In any case, don't you see the difference between an autocrat and an elected president? Does not the United States of America have a president, and is the US not democratic? And how do you propose to sustain the parliamentary form of democracy in this country, with 10 or 15 political parties, none with a national outlook or program, except the Muslim League?" He thought that we should decree by law that there were to be only 2 parties, but I answered, "Tamizuddin Sahib, if by law you can control people's conscience, then why don't you make all Muslims into one sect? In all there are 72 sects in Islam, even though they all seek inspiration from the Quran. Let me tell you that you cannot control people's conscience by legal contrivances," he said. "Even then, I would like to have a parliamentary form of government." In frustration and exhaustion I replied in strong terms. The old man took it well. Mr. Nurul Amin remained quiet. I think he wanted to keep out of the controversy. But Maulvi Tamizuddin spoke with conviction, genuine conviction, however unrealistic. I always admired his courage, so a great debate started as to the respective merits of the parliamentary and presidential systems of government. Some, like Maulvi Tamizuddin Khan, held that the parliamentary system in the country had been condemned without having been given enough time to establish itself. What they meant, perhaps, was that we had not given ourselves enough rope to hang ourselves with. Had we gone on for another 5 or 10 years the way we were going, we should have been doomed. The point is that a parliamentary system can only work when you have well-organized parties, and a limited number of parties, each working for a clear-cut social and economic program. Some people say, what does it matter if we have 5 or 10 parties? We can always have a coalition government. Is that the best we can do for the country? Can coalition governments, in a developing country, take difficult and firm decisions, sometimes against tradition and the customary way of life? A responsible government cannot be a prisoner of wayward public opinion. You have to move ahead of public opinion, and draw people in your direction. The objectives before me were the unification of the people and the development of the country. To attain these objectives we required a stable representative government, continuity of administration, and well-planned programs of economic growth. The nation had to move resolutely into the age of science and technology while maintaining a firm hold on the essential principles of its faith and ideology. It is easy to talk about removing the inhibiting effects of history. It is a different thing dealing with them in practical life. How can you run a parliamentary democracy when you have big landlords in the country who can influence thousands of votes? How can you run a parliamentary democracy when you have payars and fakirs who can influence the people indirectly? How can you have parliamentary democracy or stability when you have 10 or 15 or more political parties in the country without any program whatsoever? How can you have parliamentary democracy when you have not even reached the level of universal primary education? While trying to create institutions, the easiest thing to do is to get hold of some textbook, English or American or Russian, and say, this is how they did it. Why not follow their text? The point is, will it work? Will people take it to heart? Will they regard it as their own? If not, then the whole exercise will end in futility. Part 4. I was once asked, in which book did you come across the fundamentals of the Constitution? In the Book of Pakistan, I replied, it is based on my knowledge of the people and the soil of Pakistan. I do not know whether the term basic democracies describes aptly or fully the system of local governments which I envisaged. It was basic insofar as the whole structure was to be built from the ground upwards, and it was democratic in the sense that the affairs of the country were to be entrusted to the people within a constitutional framework. I had two broad objectives in mind. One was to organize people to take care of the problems of their areas, and to inculcate in them the spirit of self-help. The other, to find a meaningful electoral system for the election of the president and the members of assemblies. The democratic instrument, as worked by the politicians, had been warped beyond recognition. The Constitution which had been introduced in 1956 was no better than a bundle of unworkable compromises. My endeavor from 1958 on had been to restore the nation by introducing necessary reforms in various fields. All these reforms were devised and oriented to prepare the country and the people for a representative government in the shortest possible time. The object was not to impose any particular system from above, but to cause a system to grow from below in relation to the social, economic, educational and moral realities of the situation. All changes and reforms that were introduced had only one purpose: to prepare the base on which the upward pyramid of a sound political system could be developed. Past experience had shown that the Western type of parliamentary democracy could not be imposed on the people of Pakistan. There were certain basic requirements in the Western system which were lacking here. This system presupposed a high degree of social and political awareness, universal education, and an advanced system of mass communication for speedy and accurate dissemination of information on a wide variety of themes of individual and general interest. In the absence of these prerequisites, people could not be expected to exercise their right of vote in the context of broad national policies. It is too much to expect a man sick and illiterate, and worried about buyer's next meal, to think in terms of national policies. Now we could not wait for these conditions to come into existence before restoring democracy. We had to introduce a system which the people would be able to understand and work in spite of their handicaps. This meant going to the hard core of the nation. The large majority of our people lived in villages. They were mostly uneducated and illiterate, but they had the wisdom to understand their own problems. What was needed was to put the problems to them in a simple and straightforward manner, to enable them to form a judgment. Again, in asking them to make a choice between individuals, they should be enabled to know them personally or by reputation. These difficulties about the formulation of issues and providing knowledge about individuals could be largely overcome if there were well-organized political parties, supported by advanced media of communication, capable of explaining their programs to the people. Unfortunately, we had no political parties worth the name. Those that existed had no national program. To ask people to join in a mass ritual of voting for candidates whom they had never seen or known really meant robbing them of their vote by inducement or intimidation. Such an arrangement suited only demagogues and charlatans. Since these had nothing concrete to offer, they vied with each other in arousing the passions of the people and working on their emotions. People engulfed by economic and social problems responded to their appeals. They were promised the moon, and for a moment, they allowed themselves to be deluded and duped. More often than not, these appeals had a negative and disruptive character. All this tended to generate hysteria and created suspicion, distrust and disunity among the people. Under this system, people were really being used against themselves. I was fully conscious of the opposition I would encounter on introducing any change in the system, first from the intellectuals, a small but vocal minority fed on Western ideas. These people, because they have had the advantage of education, form the elite and regard themselves as leaders of public opinion. They talk in terms of the people, often quite genuinely, but few among them have any real contact with the people, and fewer still have given any serious thought to the problems of the people. It is enough for them to claim that all power should belong to the masses. They are not worried about how and in what form the power should be exercised. They claim to fight against illiteracy, poverty, hunger and disease. But the fight is conducted through slogans, not solutions. They react strongly against illiteracy, but do little for the illiterate. They condemn poverty but have no sympathy for the poor. They blame hunger but offer no relief to the hungry. Secondly, the opposition would come from the vested interests, the politicians and the landlords. They are accustomed to commanding the allegiance and loyalty of the people in their areas, and they will not allow the individual to exercise his judgment, or question their authority. And finally, opposition would come from the orthodox classes, the obscurantists who frustrate all progress under cover of religion. All these people would fight against any change in the electoral system, which would make the common man the master of his own will. Yet one must do the right thing by the country, whatever the consequences. I went down to the village level in the rural areas, and the mohalla level in the cities. That was the level at which one could get to know the people directly and intimately. That was where the real problems existed. I realized that the masses in the village, however uneducated, were conscious of the immediacy and urgency of individual and community interests. It was at that level that they knew the people on whom they could depend to help and guide them, and to work for them. A system of government which had its roots at that level would bear fruit. I formulated the following principles to govern the future role of basic democracies. First, they should reflect the representation of the people obtained in the most direct manner. Secondly, they should become the nerve centers of their areas, where all local problems of development and civic responsibility could be studied at close range, and their solutions discovered and applied with concentrated attention. Thirdly, they should in course of time absorb the official agencies and begin to function as people bodies. And finally, they should be operated to generate vigor and enthusiasm, and liberate those moral and intellectual forces which are essential to the development of a dynamic and dedicated leadership in the country. 2 days after martial law was promulgated, I told a press conference, on October 10, 1958, that power would be handed back to the people. 3 months later, I went on record as saying that as soon as vital reforms had been carried out, the country would have a constitution based on the wishes of the people, and capable of serving their interests. I had made it clear that Pakistan would not copy any other country's constitution, but would have one entirely her own in keeping with the country's social and economic conditions. The creation of basic democracies was the first step towards fulfilling this objective. And as experience has subsequently proved, through the system of basic democracies we have been able to awaken and organize the masses into taking intimate and practical interest in their collective affairs, and having a deep sense of self-help and participation. The gulf between the officials and the masses has been narrowed. The decision to create basic democracies was taken at the Governors' Conference held in Karachi from 30 April to May 1, 1959. More detailed decisions on the new system were taken at the Governors' Conference at Nathiagali on 12 to 13 June that year. The formal Basic Democracies Order was promulgated on 26 October, providing for the setting up of institutions ranging from local councils to provincial development advisory councils. Elections to the Basic Democracies units were completed early in January 1960. Martial law regulations prohibiting the organization, convening, or attending of any political meetings organized by candidates were relaxed for the forthcoming elections. Approximately, a unit of 1,000 voters, adults male and female, was required to elect one representative. These single-member units, which numbered about 80,000, approximately 40,000 in each province, were then to be grouped together to form the tiers of the local administration system. There were to be about 4,000 of these first-stage groupings in each province, and they were to be known as the union councils in the rural areas, and the town or union committees in the urban areas. At this stage, I felt that I should have a mandate from the people to continue in my task. It was therefore decided that before the election results of basic democracies were announced, I should take the opportunity of seeking a vote of confidence from the 80,000 basic Democrats, so that I might be able to give the country a constitution under a mandate from the people. The results of the vote of confidence, as announced by the Election Commission on 15 February 960, were 75,283 affirmative votes in my favor, representing 95.6% of the approximately 80,000 votes cast. After being sworn in as the first elected president of Pakistan on February 17, 1960, I immediately announced the setting up of a Constitution Commission, under Mr. Justice Shahabuddin of the Supreme Court, with 5 members from each province. The Commission's terms of reference were: 1. To examine the progressive failure of parliamentary government in Pakistan, leading to the abrogation of the Constitution of 1956, and to recommend how a recurrence of similar causes can be prevented. 2. To submit proposals for a constitution, taking into consideration the genius of the people, the general standard of education and political judgment in the country, the present state of nationhood, the need for sustained development, and the effect of constitutional and administrative changes in recent months. 3. The proposals would embody recommendations as to how best the following ends could be achieved: I. A democracy adaptable to changed circumstances, and based on the Islamic principles of justice, equality and tolerance. T. Consolidation of national unity, and T. A firm and stable system of government. Many people thought at the time that I was moving too fast and that I should allow sufficient time for the reforms to take root. We had earned considerable respect and prestige in the world by bringing them about and achieving substantial results. Much of this would be imperiled by too swift a return to a constitutional government. An English friend asked me, "Why are you in such a hurry to bring in a constitution?" I said, "I thought you were a democratic people." He replied, "Yes, but you are running the country so well under the present system, and you are making sound progress. You will land yourself in trouble again if you are not careful." At home too, there were certain people, including some members of my cabinet, who were convinced that the vested interests who had been badly hit by our reforms, such as landowners, politicians and similar groups, would combine in an all-out attempt to unseat me and to destroy whatever had been achieved in the past few years. I knew the feelings of the people at large also. Many thought I was throwing them back to the wolves and that once again there would be no respect for law, that corruption and jockeying for power would return, with all the other ugly features of our political life in the past. I realized that once the lid was off, the politicians would run amok, and try to demolish everything I had done. The press would also lend a helping hand, because newspapers that advocate irresponsibility and opposition to government run up very high sales. I knew also that people who had benefited from the reforms were not strong or organized enough to defend their new positions, so it would be my task to defend them, and the new laws against pressure groups and vested interests. Nevertheless, I came to the conclusion that it was better to take the risk, even if all our reforms had not yet taken root, and to let the people carry on from that point. They must assimilate and implement the reforms according to their capacity. I was not forced to this decision by any internal or external pressure, but I was deeply conscious of the grave responsibility which I had undertaken to give the country the right sort of constitution. I thought I had the answer, and I wanted to put it into effect. I had announced in October 1958 that I intended to work, as near as may be, to the 1956 Constitution. Though martial law had operated under the 1956 Constitution, it was effective because a focus of power was created by the martial law apparatus, which was lacking in the 1956 Constitution itself. I had worked out definite ideas about the future Constitution, but I was fully prepared to accept the Commission's recommendation, even if they are different from my ideas, provided they are better than mine, and good for the country. Further, The Commission enjoys full freedom and full powers to make such recommendations as it deems proper for the country. In this behalf, it is not to be influenced by anything except its own conscience and its love for Pakistan. After the establishment of the Commission, there was nothing to do but wait for its report, which was presented to me on May 6, 1961. The Commission found that the causes of the failure of the parliamentary form of government in Pakistan were mainly the lack of leadership resulting in the lack of well-organized and disciplined parties, the lack of character in the politicians, and their undue interference in the administration. Under the circumstances, it recommended that Pakistan should have a form of government where there is only one person at the head of affairs, with an effective restraint exercised on him by an independent legislature, members of which, however, should not be in a position to seriously interfere with the administration by exercising political pressure for their personal ends. The need for a strong centre with a quasi-federal structure was strongly advocated by the Commission, dealing with a minority view that the centre should be given only 3 subjects: defence, foreign affairs and currency, the remaining powers being left with the provinces. The Constitution Commission said one of the main grounds for this view was that the Lahore Resolution of 1940 speaks of independent states, and that therefore the provinces should be autonomous. But the East Pakistan envisaged in the Lahore Resolution was the whole of Bengal and Assam, which could have been an autonomous province, as it would have had industries and large economic resources. It could not have been anticipated at that stage that the former Bengal and Punjab provinces would be divided, and Pakistan would get, as its eastern half, the unindustrialized portion of Bengal. The partition of these provinces was a later development arising from the last-minute efforts of the majority community of undivided India to avoid partition of the subcontinent. If, at the time of the Lahore Resolution, it could have been foreseen that ultimately a division would take place and that the present East Pakistan would be the only portion of Pakistan in the East, the Muslim League would not have thought of regarding it as an autonomous province because, without industrial development, it is impossible for East Pakistan to sustain itself as an independent unit. At the time the Lahore Resolution was passed, partition of the subcontinent into 2 independent countries was not within the pale of practical politics. It seems to us extremely unwise and unrealistic to insist on a literal following of the said resolution, regardless of whether the present units of Pakistan can develop themselves and manage their own affairs without a strong centre. The Commission advocated a bicameral legislature, a vice president, direct election on the basis of restricted, adult franchise, and separate electorates. I accepted the Commission's suggestions regarding the presidential form of government, the federal structure, and its plea for a strong centre. However, I was unable to accept its recommendation for a bicameral legislature and a vice president. The franchise question was left to the legislature, which decided in April 1964, in favor of basic democracies serving as an electoral college for elections to the national and the provincial assemblies, and to the office of president. I must say I was impressed by the work of the Constitution Commission. It had produced a document worthy of the highest consideration, and I remember I made detailed comments on its report for the guidance of a committee of the Cabinet which examined the report. My own analysis had led me to the conclusion that Pakistan needed a strong government, capable of taking decisions which might not be popular, but which were necessary for the safety, integrity, and in particular, development of the country. We could not afford the luxury of a system which would make the existence of the government subservient to the whims and operations of pressure groups. On this, I was not prepared to make any compromise. A comparison is often sought between political conditions in India and Pakistan. How is it, it is asked, that the Indians have been working a parliamentary democracy, while we have not been able to do so? Well, first of all, national consciousness came to the Hindus much earlier than to the Muslims of the subcontinent. The Indian National Congress Party was formed much earlier. Among the Hindus there was no schism as among the Muslims. There were several Hindu parties, but they were united on the fundamentals. The Muslims were divided. Some warned to try out living with the Hindus in the mistaken belief that they would have a place in Hindu nationalism. The majority of Muslims, however, knew that after the British, they would be subjected to another form of domination, namely, that of the Hindu majority. Among the Hindus there may have been some who thought, let us tolerate the Muslims, but the majority wanted either to drive them out, or keep them as serfs. But the fact that the Hindus have been able so far to run a democratic state with a parliamentary form of government does not mean that this system has come to stay in India. I believe changes will occur, and that the impetus and cohesion that the freedom movement generated is now dying out because of the emergence of personal wrangles, regional tensions, and linguistic identities. Disintegration of the Congress Party is inevitable. When that happens, India will face later what we faced earlier. To come back to the Constitution Commission's report, on the question of franchise and the mode of voting, I differed with the views of the Commission. It recommended a system of direct elections based on restricted franchise. It suggested that the extension of franchise should go hand in hand with the spread of education and, in our present circumstances, the suffrage should be restricted to those citizens of Pakistan who either were educated enough to read the political debates, or had adequate property to give them a stake in the country. For this purpose it recommended that a franchise committee be appointed which should submit, within 1 year, its report determining the required standards so that electoral rolls could be prepared in time for direct elections for the second term. I could not see why basic Democrats should not become an electoral college. Here we had 80,000 members elected directly by the people on the basis of adult franchise, and they in fact formed the Grand Assembly of Pakistan. Why should not they choose the president and members of the legislature? To condemn them because a small proportion of basic Democrats were uneducated was nothing short of pedantry. Surely these 80,000 members were better equipped and qualified to elect members of the assemblies than the previous 80, who used to make and unmake governments in the days of parliamentary governments. A case is sometimes made out against basic Democrats, acting as an electoral college on the ground that, being limited in number, they are susceptible to bribery and corruption. I am afraid it is true that in some constituencies, money docks change hands, especially in big cities and places where there are moneyed people. But it is not entirely the fault of the basic Democrats, it is the moneyed candidates who corrupt them, and compete with each other in bribery. I have come to Karachi. The opponents of a candidate thought of a simple formula for getting him defeated. They just went round and told voters to demand so much money per vote. Now, some voters cannot resist such a temptation. This would happen even if elections were held on the basis of direct adult franchise. In fact, far more money would then pass hands, and only a millionaire would dare to contest. This, however, does not absolve us from doing all we can to eliminate or reduce chances of corruption in elections. The trouble is that unless people are politically conscious, and realize their sacred duty of exercising the right of vote on principle, no amount of legal provision against corruption can help. I was quite clear in my mind that until our educational and economic standards and the level of political responsibility improved considerably, the only course for us was to adopt indirect elections through basic democracies. Moreover, there would be terrible confusion and chaos in the country if the importance of basic Democrats was belittled in any manner. It was the first time that representatives of the people had come to a position of equality with government officials at different levels of administration, and had acquired a direct say in the running of the country. If any attempt was made to bypass them in building the final tiers of representative government, it would meet with strong resistance. The system was fast taking root in the country, and an identification was being established between the official agencies of government and the representatives of the people. I also could not agree with the Commission's recommendations for the creation of a post of Vice President, to whom the President should delegate some of his functions. The Commission's view was that Vice President should represent one wing, and President, the other wing. The idea that a Vice President could relieve a President of his onerous duties is not correct. He could not have the total picture before him. Major matters would always go up to the President, and a Vice President should not be confined to routine work. The idea of a Vice President as a running mate was in fact unsound. The supreme need would always be to find the best man for President, because so much would depend on him. If he were to be bracketed with a second-rate man, the focus of elective decision might be blurred. Equally fallacious was the argument that a running mate would help the President secure votes from the province other than his own. A presidential candidate should be a national figure, enjoying the confidence of the people of all parts of the country. He would make a poor president if he depended on a vice president for political support in one part of the country. The representation of one wing of the country through a vice president would inevitably create East-West controversies and set up factions within the presidential cabinet itself. What was needed was to provide for a standby to take over from the president in the event of his death or absence from the country. This could be done by establishing a convention that if the president was from one wing, the Speaker of the National Assembly should be from the other, and that he should officiate in the absence of the president. The Constitution Commission also recommended a complicated procedure relating to any disagreement between president and legislature over the budget and money bills. I agreed with its view that the president should have the right of partial veto, but I disagreed with the rest of the recommendation, which required the president and members of the legislature to seek a fresh mandate from the people in the event of their failure to resolve the difference. I felt that we should have nothing but instability if we followed this procedure. To say, as the Commission had said, that the members of the legislature would be less inclined to act irresponsibly if they had to seek re-election in the event of any difference with the president, overlooked the fact that if we made basic democracies the electoral college, as we must, then re-election would hold no terror for an average legislator, whereas the president would have the formidable task of canvassing all over the country, because his electorate would cover the entire strength of 80,000 electors. The answer was to reduce to the minimum the causes of disagreement between the president and the legislature. The budget should be in two parts. One part should cover the expenditure required for the administration, and the continuing expenditure on development programs, carried forward from the previous year. The other part should cover all new items of expenditure. Any reduction in expenditure in the first part should require the consent of the President, and the second part should be voted by the legislature. Part 5. The proposals of the Constitution Commission were examined at a Governors' Conference in Rawalpindi from 24 to October 31, 1961. I announced the Constitution in a broadcast to the nation on March 1, 1962. I said that the new Constitution embodied a blending of democracy with discipline, the two prerequisites to running a free society with stable government and sound administration. The Constitution was generally well received, though there was no lack of criticism in a certain section of the press. Some of the old politicians thought that if the new constitutional scheme was allowed to get established, they would lose all importance. One of the bitterest critics was Chaudhry Muhammad Ali, author of the 1956 Constitution. He felt robbed of immortality. On the introduction of the Constitution, the country started behaving like a wild horse that had been captured, but not yet tamed. Every time you try to stroke it affectionately or feed it, it bites you and kicks you. That was the state in which things were at first. For a year or so the going was hard, but then things began to calm down, and the virtue of stability was recognized, the whole object of the critics during the first year or so. Inside the National Assembly, outside the Assembly, through the press, through ex-politicians or aboded politicians, was to break my will. Once they had done that, they felt that I would have no option but to follow their dictates. They wanted to reassert their control, and once again be the kingmakers if not the kings. They wanted to bring about a situation where not so much my position that would not have mattered, but the very existence of the country would depend on their sweet will. They wanted me to feel that I would not be able to run the country without them. That was their game. At the height of the agitation against the Constitution, I learnt the gist of a certain leading politician's thoughts. This president is a funny man. He knows that the whole lot of them are up against him, and he also knows that I am the only man who can curb this agitation and produce some understanding between the people and him. Yet he has been back a fortnight from England, and has made no overtures to me. There must be something seriously wrong with him. They really thought I would go down on my knees and say, "All right, I give up, you fellows win." Curiously enough, they also realized that they could not run the affairs of the country without me. They wanted to keep me on some pedestal, so long as I left them free to do what they liked with the country. They said they were not after me personally, but were after breaking my resolve, and thereby putting me in a position where I could not prevent them from wrecking the country. All they wanted was an opportunity to get at the people through demagogy and empty slogans, and to use them for selfish ends. I was bent upon preventing this, cost what it might. My faith in God and in the people sustained me. Our people are good, I knew, but they are simple-hearted, hence gullible, and they can be easily misled. It was this conviction which helped me, but there were moments when it was extremely difficult and trying. I would say to myself, this outburst of irresponsibility under a new constitution is inevitable. Martial law curbs have come to an end, the lid has been lifted, the steam has to be let off. I knew that things would settle down in course of time, but it all depended on whether I remained firm or not. The final test of the Constitution would be the presidential elections in 1965. For the first time, the entire adult population in the country would choose the head of state through their elected representatives. The results of that election would establish the support of the people for the Constitution. Until then, the process of persuasion and education must go on. People must learn to give and take. Without this there can be no democratic system. After all, one cannot have it all one's own way. The minority must accept the verdict of the majority. They have the right to criticize but not the right to destroy. My opponents sometimes say, "This man is a dictator, he has all the power in Allah's hands." How? I do not know. After all, there always has to be someone finally in charge, whatever the system, be it parliamentary or presidential, a monarchy or a dictatorship. There are many to assist, but, in the ultimate analysis, one man has to take the final decision. This has been the case throughout history, and it is so even today all the world over. If the man is chosen by the people, and if he is a good man, he has to be trusted and given full cooperation. To my knowledge, there has never been so much freedom in this country as there is today. On a number of occasions I have been accused, abused and vilified, subjected to all kinds of rumors and slanders, all thoroughly unjustified and untrue, by some of the biggest blackguards in the country, and I have swallowed it. I have put up with it for the simple reason that I want to nurse and protect the system. I will not allow it to be demolished. I also feel that if the man at the top commands respect, he does not have to be a dictator. The people will follow him in their own interest, because human nature demands, and indeed cannot live without leadership. And whether one likes or dislikes the leader, nature compels one to support him because one knows subconsciously that one's safety and future depends on it. But to maintain a position of trust with the people, one must be sincere and selfless, and have the fear of God in one's heart. In the light of past experience, I had provided certain built-in safeguards in the Constitution to enable the executive to withstand home pressures without in any way hindering the working of the legislature. The opposition, conveniently forgetting the mandate which the people had given me, have continued to say that this Constitution has been thrust down their throats. Now, they can go to the people's representatives and ask them to change the Constitution. There is a clear provision in the Constitution that if there is anything which does not meet with the wishes of the people, the members of the legislature can amend it. They have the powers even to impeach the president. But to ensure that these provisions are not frivolously used, they can be invoked only subject to certain restrictions. The Constitution Commission had provided for the impeachment of President, governors, ministers, Chief Justice, and judges of the Supreme Court. The President could be impeached for gross misconduct or willful violation of the Constitution on a motion of 1/4 of the elected members of the legislature. We decided to make the motion admissible on a resolution signed by 1/3 or the total members of the National Assembly. The Commission had recommended that the President would vacate his office if he was found guilty by 2/3 of the total members of the legislature. In the Constitution, we made him removable by not less than 3/4 of the total members. In order to check irresponsible and vindictive moves against the President, it has been provided that if the resolution for the removal of the President fails to obtain 1/2 of the total votes in the National Assembly, the movers of the impeachment resolution will cease to be members of the Assembly. I felt that governors and ministers should be omitted from the list of those who could be impeached, because they were to be the appointees of the President. It was natural that if he sensed opposition to his governors and ministers in the legislature, the President would make it his business to remove them, in order to carry the legislature with him. As nominees of the President, they did not have to be exposed to the legislature. The Constitution Commission had made the amendment of the Constitution an easy process. It recommended that any amendment would be subject to the assent of the President in the same manner as any other piece of legislation, with the difference that the bill for the amendment should be supported by a 2/3 majority. If the President withheld his assent and referred the bill back to the legislature, the effect of his veto could be nullified by a 3/4 majority. We decided that before a bill for the amendment of the Constitution went to the President for assent, it should have a 2/3 majority support, but if he referred it back to the legislature, then it would have to be passed again by a 3/4 majority vote. However, when the bill went again to the President for assent, he would have the option to refer it back to the legislature once more, and if the legislature insisted, he could submit the bill to a referendum by the entire Electoral College to decide whether it should or should not be assented to. However, a bill to amend the Constitution that would have the effect of altering the limits of a province cannot be passed by the National Assembly unless it has been approved by a resolution of the Assembly of the province concerned by 2/3 of the total number of members of the Provincial Assembly. The structure of the Constitution has been raised on a number of pillars. These are the presidential system, the devolution of power to the provinces to the maximum extent, the appointment of provincial governors by the President, the system of basic democracies serving as an electoral college, the Advisory Council on Islamic Ideology for consultation in lawmaking, and finally the relationship between the executive and the legislature, and between the executive and the judiciary. If any of these pillars is shifted or removed, the whole structure would be weakened. The Constitution stands or falls as a whole. With the creation of the Electoral College, all that has been done is to interpose an additional large assembly between the people and the provincial and central assemblies and the President. New ideas need time to gather support. It is after the benefits begin to flow from those ideas that their defenders emerge. These defenders then become the protagonists and protectors of those ideas. In human affairs, new concepts must produce new vested interests. The reforms which I introduced have created powerful, though not yet organized, vested interests. There are millions of men and women who are tillers of the soil, deriving substantial benefits from the land reforms. Then there are the commercial and business classes, and the educated classes who are getting more and more opportunities for education and employment. Today it is a problem to find suitable young men for government service, whereas some years ago to get into government service was regarded as the height of one's ambition. Now a new vista of life and opportunities is opening, new things are happening, new interests of a broad-based and popular character are developing, and a large new middle class is emerging. It is these people who will ultimately look after the new system given by the Constitution, though this will take time. It has been my task to identify the new philosophy, which would enable our people to lead a fuller and more progressive life. This philosophy has to be such as people believe in, and are ready to defend and support. Weaning people away from an established system which they have long known, even if it is decadent and remote from their requirements, is a very difficult job. People tend to embrace the comforts of the old, rather than risk the hazards of the new. The most glaring example of this is the parliamentary form of government. The moment I offered a different and more practical system, some people started an agitation that I was trying to perpetuate myself in power. That is the last thing in the world that I desire, but I do want to perpetuate one thing, and that is a new tradition of progress and development. I do hope that I am creating some converts to my way of thinking, and to this way of life. I also feel that this way of life can only really be sustained by young people. The older leadership must yield place to a new and younger leadership. My endeavor has been to create conditions for younger people to take over, for they alone will be able to develop this tradition and improve upon it. That is the only vested interest I have, to save and protect the system for which I have sweated blood. I have had to work against very heavy odds, and I will not see this system trifled with. Modify it, change it by all means, but in the light of experience, in a spirit of conviction and belief, and for the good of the people, not for any other reason. In a presidential system, if one has a man as president who can stand up to pressure, the chances are that another 5 or 10 years can be gained for new institutions to take deeper roots, for education to spread farther, and for a larger middle class to come into existence. There would then be enough people to defend these institutions. And that is what is at stake in Pakistan today. The big change from the previous parliamentary system is that whereas the present National Assembly is sovereign in lawmaking, it cannot change the government. True political bickering and mudslinging by the opposition goes on, as in the past, but that is inevitable, especially since our new parliamentarians are inexperienced. But it is important that they should have full freedom of speech and expression. I must confess to one miscalculation in respect of the Constitution. Having suffered through the perfidy of the so-called political parties, I was hoping that we would be able to run our politics without the party system. Therefore the Constitution was so framed, that, in theory, it would function with or without political parties. After the introduction of the Constitution, I soon came to realize that one could not do without political parties. Within the legislature the members could only be organized on the basis of party rule and discipline. Outside there had to be an organization to maintain contact with the people. There was also a need to explain government policies to the people in the countryside. This could only be done by a political party. So I came to the conclusion that under our conditions one could not really work the system without political parties. And I think a good deal of confusion in the first year after the announcement of the Constitution occurred, because it took us time to build the Muslim League Party, especially in the central and provincial legislatures. This was not surprising since the legislators had been elected on individual merit, and I knew very few of them. Before the elections I told the provincial governors, and the officials, that these elections must be completely free from influence, or interference. I warned them, that if I learnt that anybody had meddled with the elections in any way, I would have serious cause for complaint, if we had decided to revive political parties before the elections. I have no doubt that the government would have had powerful support in the legislature. Revival of parties had been suggested to me, but in a hesitant and feeble manner. It is human to be wary of something from which you have suffered, and we had suffered greatly through the party system. There was considerable surprise in the country when I joined the Pakistan Muslim League. This only showed how, like myself, many people felt that we should have run the constitution without political parties. But the politicians too were dismayed at my decision to join a political party. They wanted me to remain isolated. The question was, could I remain outside the party system once parties had been allowed to come into being by the law? People sometimes ask me to help organize an opposition party. Now that is really a most unusual demand. How do I do that when the ideology of most of our opposition parties is based on acute provincialism, religious exploitation, and extraterritorial loyalty? Let any opposition party work for Muslim nationalism in Pakistan, and a strong centre, and it will have my support. Unfortunately, even within the legislature, the opposition has been behaving in a way which has forced me to rely entirely on my own party. This need not be. The President should be free to pick men for his cabinet depending on merit and support, either inside or outside the legislature, regardless of party affiliations. A presidential cabinet in our conditions need not, indeed should not, be a one-party cabinet. Part 6. Before concluding this discussion on the Constitution, I must refer to a phenomenon which has been the cause of considerable tension and misunderstanding between the two provinces. This is the slogan of disparity, which has assumed considerable significance and usually refers to an assumed lack of equality between the two provinces of the country. It is a much abused word, and covers a wide variety of complaints and grievances, very often of a personal character. If a candidate does not have the requisite qualifications, and is therefore not selected for a job, he dubs it disparity. So does a shopkeeper who cannot collect enough capital to set up a jute mill. The jute mill owner, too, claims himself to be a victim of disparity because he cannot expand into synthetics and chemicals. The politician has seized on this general impatience for a personal advancement, and turned it into a popular political slogan. He bases his whole campaign against the central government and West Pakistan on disparity. Now disparity is recognized by all, and so is the need to remove disparity. What is not realized is that disparity is a phase in the process of development. Not all parts of Pakistan were equally developed or undeveloped at the time of independence. Certain parts of West Pakistan were relatively advanced industrially, whereas in East Pakistan there was hardly any manufacturing capacity. During the early days of British administration in the central and eastern regions of the subcontinent, all commercial and industrial activity centered round Fort William in Calcutta. There was no significant shift when India came under the direct rule of the British Crown. East Pakistan remained a hinterland of Calcutta. Although the area produced 70% of the world's jute, not a single jute mill existed in the province. The entire produce went to Calcutta in kacha bales to be processed and exported. Transport and communication facilities were of a rudimentary type, and no effort was made to exploit natural resources like coal, gas, oil, power, and water. When the younger generation in East Pakistan is reminded of these facts, they feel that past history is being used to explain away their present difficulties. They are encouraged to demand that progress in other parts of the country should be stopped till their province comes up to the same level. Now they forget that the urge for advancement which inspires them is shared equally fervently by people in other parts of the country. It is inconceivable that any government should be able to compel people in one region to work at less than their capacity till others build up an equal capacity. It should be the aim of a welfare state to narrow down the gaps and eliminate imbalance, but the only way to do it is by providing greater incentives to less developed areas, rather than by denying existing incentives to the relatively developed ones. It would be a futile and self-defeating policy to bring about uniformity by lowering levels of progress all round. The problem of regional disparities in West Pakistan has been solved to a large extent by the integration of the former provinces into one unit. Resources are used to build up social overheads, the benefits of which are available to the whole of West Pakistan regardless of the former provincial boundaries. The economic development of East Pakistan has been one of my major interests. I had said in the 1954 document that East Pakistan should be built up into an equal partner. That is the only way in which the province will be able to pull its weight in national affairs. Even though Suhrawardy as Prime Minister in 1957 had declared that East Pakistan had achieved parity with West Pakistan, to the extent of 98%, I thought it necessary to make a provision in the constitution itself for the removal of inter-regional and intra-regional disparities. It has been provided as a principle of lawmaking in the Constitution that no law shall be enacted which may hinder the growth of any distinct language, script or culture. And as a principle of policy, the Constitution enjoins on the government to take special care to promote the educational and economic interests of people of backward classes or in backward areas. The Constitution also provides for special consideration to be given to people of a particular area to enter into the service of Pakistan, to perform functions in relation to that area. This is intended to ensure that in relation to the central government, persons from all parts of Pakistan, and in relation to a provincial government, persons from all parts of the province, should have an opportunity of getting employment under the government. Apart from these general considerations, the Constitution provides that parity should be achieved, as nearly as is practicable, between the provinces of East and West Pakistan in all spheres of central government. Similarly, the Constitution requires that persons from all parts of Pakistan be enabled to serve in the defense services of Pakistan. To attend to the special economic needs of less developed areas, the National Economic Council is required, under Article 145 of the Constitution, to formulate plans to ensure that disparities between the provinces and between the different areas within a province in relation to per capita income are removed. It is the responsibility of the Council to ensure that the resources of Pakistan, including resources in foreign exchange, are used and allocated in such a manner as to remove inter-regional and intra-regional disparities in the shortest possible time. The National Economic Council is required to submit a report every year to the National Assembly on the results obtained and the progress made in removing disparities. I decided to make these provisions in the Constitution to raise the problem of removal of disparity above the personal and parochial level. In the political sphere, East Pakistan has equal representation with West Pakistan in the National Assembly and in the President's Council of Ministers. But parity in terms of uniform economic progress requires more than constitutional provisions. While the government recognizes the principle of parity, the people too have to discharge their responsibility. It is not enough to claim parity of resources and parity of opportunities. It is equally important to recognize parity of endeavor. Equality in progress can be guaranteed only by equality in effort. So the slogan of disparity should not be used as an excuse for personal inadequacies. And I think we have achieved a considerable measure of success in building up economic capacity in East Pakistan to bring it to par with the more advanced areas of West Pakistan. Until 1957-8, East Pakistan was getting no more than 40% of the total amount made available by the central government as assistance to the provinces. According to the latest figures, in 1966-7, East Pakistan will receive from the central government 1,746.21 million rupees as against 1,200.7 billion rupees assigned to West Pakistan. There is no truth in the claim that East Pakistan's earnings of foreign exchange are utilized by West Pakistan. The position in 1963-4 was that East Pakistan had a minus balance of foreign trade to the tune of 224.6 million rupees, and a minus balance of 381.9 million rupees in interwing trade between East and West Pakistan. In 1964-5, the foreign trade balance of East Pakistan was minus 434.5 million rupees, and the interwing balance minus 382.1 million rupees. These figures are conclusive proof that there is no transfer of capital from East to West Pakistan, nor is West Pakistan using the foreign exchange earnings of East Pakistan. What needs to be recognized is that the whole country must participate fully in the national effort for development. This, I have said, requires not only making demands for parity, but working for parity by contributing equal endeavor. Part 7. You must always carry the people with you. You may have a first-class idea, but that idea can be useful and effective only if it is put into practice. And it is the people alone who can implement ideas. Unless the people are convinced of the validity of an idea, and are prepared to go along with it, the whole purpose is defeated. My attitude and approach has always been that I am a Pakistani, and I feel for my people and my country. Here are some of my ideas which have in them the fire of my heart. Give them a trial for your own good. There's never been any attempt on my part to force anything on people against their interests. The constitution I have given is not an imported herb, it is a genuine homegrown plant. It suits the conditions, the requirements, and the genius of the people. It has all the elements of democracy, and it will work and give stability to the country. I have full faith in the present system, but it is for the people to give it a fair trial, it is for them to protect its integrity. There is no institution or system in the world that cannot be corrupted or brought into disrepute, if the beneficiaries decide to exploit it to further their limited ends, regardless of the larger interests of the community. History will not go on giving us opportunities, we have to make use of those we have. If we fail to develop the system we have got, we shall be exposing ourselves to a bleak and chaotic future.